Hey, welcome back to the Loven Cabinet Shop. I'm Bob Rosieski. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Hand Tools and Techniques. You know, few tools see as much use in the shop as the saws. They truly are the workhorses of the shop. So the ability to saw accurately to a line is a very important skill to have. I mean, think about it. If you have to spend 5 to 10 minutes trimming and adjusting every saw cut, you could easily add days, if not weeks, of extra work to your project, depending on its complexity. Now, I don't claim to be an expert sawyer by any means, but there are some techniques that I've picked up in the last several years that have really helped me to improve my sawing. Since adjusting my sawing technique, I find that I can more consistently saw accurately to the line, and I find myself spending less time adjusting errant saw cuts and fitting joinery. Now, if you've been at this for a while, these techniques are probably old news to you. You've probably been using them for years. But if you struggle with your sawing, hopefully you'll find a couple of tips in this episode that'll help you improve your skills. Now, before we actually talk about any sawing technique, I just want to take a second to talk about an appliance that really every shop should have if you're going to do any work with hand saws, and that's a saw bench. Really, to do any good work with long saws comfortably, you need to get your stock off the bench and down closer to the floor. The bench is really just too high to be using long saws. As for the bench itself, it does not have to be complex and complicated. There's an article on the website. Click in the articles section to see how I built this one. Very easy to do with scrap lumber. I made this out of an old 2x8 and some 1.5-inch square poplar stock and I think an old closet rod. You know, just has to be sturdy because you are going to be sawing on it. I also like to sit on mine, so you know I like it to be narrow enough that I can straddle it to do other work. And as for height, I want it to be about knee height. That makes it comfortable to sit on when I want to sit on it, and it's also the right height for sawing. So the taller you are, the taller your saw bench is going to be. I'm 5'6", I'm a pretty short guy, so my saw bench is only about 18 inches tall. If you're 6'5", your saw bench is going to be a lot taller than mine. So don't worry about the exact height of it. Right here, this is your measuring device right here. Doesn't get any more accurate than that. Make it about knee height and it'll be the perfect height for you for sawing. Now when it comes to using your hand saws, just like any other hand tool skill, perfect practice makes perfect. Now notice I said perfect practice. You see, you can practice your sawing all you want, but if what you're practicing is form and technique that's working against you, all you're going to do is get really good at making consistently bad saw cuts. Take it from someone who's been there. My saw cuts used to be so consistently out of square that you could calibrate your protractor by them. But believe it or not, all it took was a very small adjustment in my technique to make this problem almost completely go away. Let me show you what I mean. Alright, so let's get in position to actually do some sawing. Now I'm not actually going to cut this board, but what I want to do is I want to show you the subtle difference between how I used to position myself for sawing and how I do it now and what's made it more accurate. So I've got the board slightly overhanging the end of the bench. To start my saw cut, I'm going to put my knee on the stock. I place the saw on the waist side of the line and start it with my finger. Now, this is how I used to cut, okay? So I would start here, and this was my position. And, nice, easy saw cut, and nice, straight strokes, okay? And what I was finding was that my saw cuts were consistently out of square this way. And what I noticed when I really paid attention to my sawing one day, was that I had a tendency to tip the saw this way. Obviously, That's what made my saw cut at a square. So how did I solve that problem? Well, let's think a minute about your body's natural sense of balance. That's really what's coming into play here. Your body has this natural tendency to favor towards plumb and level. You can see level very clearly. You can just look at a line on a wall and you can pretty much tell if it's level or if it's plumb. And that's sort of what's at play here. What I'm doing here is I'm sighting my line. Okay, I'm sighting the waste side. I've got the saw on the waste side of the line, and I'm sighting this side of the saw so that I can watch my line. The problem is my body wants this saw to be plumb. So what ends up happening is, as I'm sawing, I'm unconsciously tilting that saw into what my eye sees as a plumb alignment. So how did I solve this problem? It was a very simple solution, and it really surprised me that it made that much of a difference, but all it took was a very small change in posture. So I went from this to this. Okay, let me show you that again. Started like this. This was my old sawing technique, sighting down the side of the saw plate, which actually is a pretty common recommendation. So this is my old sawing technique. My new technique is this. So what am I doing? I'm lining my eye up, my dominant eye, my right eye, right over top of the saw plate, which, by the way, is right over top of my line drawn on my board. So what does this do? Well, because my body naturally wants to keep this saw plumb to my eye, I'm sighting the top of this saw, okay? So I naturally then want to see the top of the saw and keep that cut nice and straight and plumb. This eye is on the line, so I'm not missing that, okay? So now as I'm sawing, my body, my brain, wanting to stay plumb, is keeping the saw plumb because I'm in line with my saw cut. My eye is in line with the saw, which is in line with the line that I want to cut along. And keeping everything in that line and being able to sight straight down the saw back to the line is what helps to keep the saw plumb. Okay, so let's kind of take this from my point of view, sort of like we did in the last episode, just so I can give you an idea of, again, what I'm seeing. So again, this is sort of how I was seeing things before. Sighting down this side of the saw plate, watching my line. The tendency was I would tip the saw like this so that my eye, because my eye naturally wanted that straight line through the saw to the line of my board. And that was causing out a square. So this is what I used to see. Slight change in posture. And this is what I see now when I saw. Again, and this is just right eye, obviously. My left eye is still seeing the line drawn on the board. But that change, that subtle shift in body position made a ton of difference and has helped me tremendously keep my saw cuts much more square. Okay, and the same sort of thing applies at the bench. Again, here's what I used to see. The tendency was my hand wanted to do this. Here is how I see with my right eye now when I'm sawing. I get that eye right over top of the saw. Now again, the camera's only seeing what my right eye sees, so it looks like the line is blocked out. But my left eye is seeing this, okay? So I am still seeing the line, but my right eye is over top of the saw and allows me to keep that saw plumb. Okay, so I've moved to an extreme close-up here because I really want to focus on the line for this particular demonstration. Let's say this is something like a 10-inch shoulder. So we're focusing on cross-cutting this time. Here we have a pencil line. Here we have a knife line. This is really the tip here is to use the knife line. And this is why. I want to demonstrate exactly what happens and why I think a knife line is better. So here's your 10-inch shoulder, okay? And we're going to cut that with this back saw. And here is what happens, okay? It is up to you to make sure that saw is right on that line. Okay? Not bad, not bad. But I don't know if you can tell, but I'm slightly off the line. Not too bad though, okay? So let's look at the knife line. And what I want you to do is pay really close attention to what happens. Okay? I'm going to purposely start the saw a hair away from the knife line. And I want you to watch the saw and see what happens. Okay? Did you see that? Okay? Let me show you again. There's another knife line. I'm going to start keeping my finger slightly away from the knife line. And I want you to watch the saw. Did you see what happened? Okay? The saw actually jumps into the knife line. What does that do? Well, let's say this is a 10-inch shoulder, okay? We've scribed this all the way around this entire board. If that saw jumps into that line, what it's basically doing is guaranteeing that saw is going to cut in the right place. Alright, so let's actually finish cutting this board just to demonstrate some of the mechanics here and how we're sawing comfortably. Okay, so we already talked about positioning. Okay, my knee goes on the board, my body is turned slightly sideways so that my arm clears my torso. Okay, I start the cut by placing my thumb next to the cut line. Now this one is already cut, but you get the idea. And again, I'm lining my dominant eye, my right eye in this case, because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, reverse it. I'm lining my dominant eye up over top of the line and over top of the saw. So everything is in a straight line from my eye to the back of the saw to the cut line, and that's what's keeping everything plumb. Okay, so I'm overhanging a little bit here. Okay, make sure I'm overhanging enough. Okay, now here's the motion. The arm moves in a straight line, okay? You're not twisting your body. You're not moving your arm this way. It's a straight line moving at the shoulder, straight, forward, and back. With my eye over top of the saw and over top of the line, I can keep that saw plumb and saw. Okay? Move the board up. Continue. Continue. Almost cut into my bench there. Okay. Straight. Straight movement. Okay, cross-cutting is done similarly. Again, I'm using a saw bench, but this time I have the saw bench positioned across my body instead of standing alongside of it. I'm going to cross over perpendicular to it. And I'm going to put my other knee on top of the board this time. And this allows me to turn my body and the saw to clear my body since the board is on this side. I do want to be fairly close to prevent chatter as much as possible. Doesn't mean I will. Again, my eye is over top of the saw and over top of the line. So there's a straight line from my eye to the back of the saw to the line. You can start on a pull stroke if you like. This is moving a little bit. So I don't know how well this is going to go. You can stand on it as well. And again, my eye is over the saw. Okay, so the last tip I want to talk about is straightening an errant saw cut. If you saw Shannon Rogers' recent video over on Renaissance Woodworker, he did touch on how to do this. So I thought I would just show a little bit more of a close-up, so hopefully you kind of get the idea and just sort of clarify on Shannon's point, because I think he did a pretty good job of explaining it. So I just kind of want to show the mechanics of it and how it works. So let me kind of start this off by going off my line. So I'm going to go off my line a little bit here. Okay. So you can see here that I've definitely gone off the line. Okay. So what do? Well, we need to somehow get back on that line, or we could be off the board by here. The natural tendency is to try and twist the saw, but notice what happens. Maybe I can straighten this out a little bit more with the camera, but notice what happens to the saw when I try and twist the tooth line back in line. Okay? You see what happens when I try and do this. And you may be able to get it back, but again, what's happening here is the top of the plate wants to kick out, this side's kicking in, the bottom's kicking, so you're putting twist in that cut line. And really it's just going to make matters worse. So the solution, instead of trying to twist that cut back, instead is to lay the saw down. And what we want to do is to try and reestablish a curve. Now what you can see is, I can probably lay it down here this way and sort of twist it back in. And that will work to some extent, but you're still going to have a not so great cut. So what I want to do is kind of sort of back it up a little bit and lay it down. Okay, so I'm laying it down to almost start a new curve. And you'll see I'm starting to pull away the bad cut. And the more I lay it down, the straighter I can make this cut. And what I'm doing, you'll see here how the curve is widening. And what I did, and let's see if I can zoom in on this for you. You can see how I kind of started a new curve next to the old one. Okay? And as I continue, what will happen is that new curve, the saw will tend to follow that new curve. As I lay the saw down along the line, okay? See, it jumps back every once in a while. So you have to take your time here until you get it corrected to the point you want. Now, I've lengthened that curve way back to here. Okay? So as I start to extend my saw cut, it's going to try and follow that corrected curve, which gets me back on my line. So I can now continue. Again, eye over top of the saw, over top of the line. Hold your waist, don't let it drop. And there we go. We are back. We have a nice straight line. And our cut is fairly square. Alright guys, well that's it for today's episode. I hope you found some useful tips. If there's one message I think to really take away from this episode, it's the first tip about getting your eye over the back of the saw. So again, your dominant eye. If you're right-handed, you're sawing with your right hand, get your right eye over the back of that saw. And again, that's going to help you to keep the saw plumb in the cut. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to get you in line with your cut. Okay, so you're not looking at your cut line from the side and getting that parallax error. You're looking and you're seeing what the saw is seeing. Okay, so if your saw is drifting or your saw is not on the line, your eye is over top of that line and you're going to see that. Okay, and that's really, I think that the one tip that has really helped me the most is to shift my upper body ever so slightly and just get it over top of that saw. And that has really made all the difference in my sawing. So that's it for this time. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you again next time for more hand tools and techniques.
Thanks for watching.